Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is public comment. No one has approached me. I don't believe anybody has approached the clerk, and so nobody is online for public comment, so we'll move on to item number 4, approval of the minutes of the June 8th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting. What is your pleasure? Motion by Vice Chair McHugh and second by Supervisor Seefeld. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the June 8th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting minutes as printed in the packet signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Without objection, I would like to take item 6B to allow department head to do additional work rather than sit and go through all of the other items. So is there any objection to taking item 6B out of order? Seeing none, we'll take item 6B, a discussion and possible action by the executive committee to forward to the full county board approval of a letter to Governor Evers and the state legislature regarding local control. And this is coming from the ERC committee and the chair of ERC, Mr. Langenhahn. If you want to give a little bit of background on the letter and answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the chair noted, this is a letter that came from the Environmental Resources Committee unanimously. Originally, we had aimed to have this on the agenda last month, but upon review of some of the language, I wanted to take it back to ERC and wordsmith it so that it would be ready for prime time. To give you all a little bit of background of where this is coming from, in late May, and even going back farther than that, with my time on the board going all the way back to the very beginning, certain events have highlighted the erosion of local control, specifically when it comes to environmental matters that the county has in their purview. And the three that I highlighted in this letter have to do with metallic mining, which I know Supervisor Seefeld and I think Supervisor Mask, I believe you're on the call. You recall the discussions that we had back in 2018. And I think that we saw the wall that we ran up against regarding what could be legally defensible, what the state was already regulating, and we realized that there were a lot of limitations as far as what we could do. And as the letter notes, unfortunately what we see is that instead of having site-specific solutions, meaning that there's solutions that are driven by the community, there's engagement, community members are brought together to ultimately do what's best for their community. Instead, the state of Wisconsin essentially says, no, we have uniform standards for the entire state. We are going to limit you as far as what you can actually influence on this process. So with wind siting, there have been extensive discussions this year in regards to some activity on the western side of the county. I should back up. The reason why we have an interest with metallic mining is, of course, because on the eastern side of the county with the REAP deposit. With the wind siting in western Marathon County, there have been a lot of concerns that have been brought up, not only by residents, but also by supervisors as well. And I think that we need to do a good job as a advocacy, or I should say as a way to advocate on those interests, to message to the legislature that we're concerned that we don't have a lot of autonomy when it comes to those wind sites that are above 100 megawatts. And then the third one, which has to do with manure runoff and CAFOs, I will say that those of you who have known me for a long time, I do believe that you can marry the development of natural resources with economic development. I truly do. We had a lot of discussions about that back with metallic mining. And I have a lot of respect for the agriculture community because I am a member of the agriculture community. So I do want to say that with the mention of this one here, this is not a critique of ag producers in Marathon County. Really, it's a critique of the bureaucracy that the state of Wisconsin has put together in regards to NR 151. In order to have those site-specific solutions that I previously mentioned, you essentially have to go to the bureaucrats in Madison and go through a process subject to their approval, at least to the best of my understanding, in order to get those standards that you want. Which I believe is ridiculous because, we're elected here to make decisions on behalf of the people that we represent in these matters. And I think it's ridiculous that a bureaucrat in Madison could have more sway than, a resident who actually lives here that could be affected by a potential site. Without waxing too much more poetic, there was actually a article in WPR, Wisconsin Public Radio, last week with some local governments in Polk County, not the county, but some local governments in Polk County, where they're actually rescinding their ordinances that they had in place with regulating CAFOs because of the questionable, or at least to the best of my knowledge, the questionable legal standing that they have. And then with CAFOs themselves, and like I said, we've been very fortunate in this county, specifically with our department, to have stepped enforcement instead of, immediately issuing citations. That's not the culture that we have in Marathon County. We work with the producer to get them into compliance. But with CAFOs, we don't even have a say. All that stuff goes through the state of Wisconsin, and it's their responsibility for enforcement. So with those three matters, and especially with some of the events over the course of this past year, with the mining discussions we had last spring, and with some of the discussions that we had with wind siting for sites above 100 megawatts this spring, I really thought it was necessary for the Environmental Resources Committee to come together and put a message out to the governor of the state of Wisconsin, as well as the state legislature, that they need to do their jobs and they need to do them better. Because when it comes to a matter of local control, we shouldn't be in a situation where the state keeps taking more away from us. We need to have a say in what's going on in our communities. And that's why, essentially, at the end of the day, with this letter, the simple ask is we want the state of Wisconsin to trust us and provide us with the authority to do what's best for our communities. Because one-size-fits-all regulations are not working. They aren't. The other thing I want to touch on was why a letter. And, I think letters have some challenges compared to, let's say, a resolution. Letters more personable. We'll probably get a legislator, hopefully the governor's attention more than just a resolution. You can kind of see that with pages 99 and 100 in the packet. Rather than bogging down a complex topic like this with a bunch of whereases, a letter might be, or I would say a letter is more appropriate in this case. And as far as why the letter is important, well, we have to do something, because I don't want to see a situation where the state legislature thinks that they have a blank permission slip to keep taking more local authority away from us. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions. I was the author of this letter, or I should say at least the first draft before I took it to ERC. I worked with Corporation Counsel as well as Conservation Planning and Zoning staff to get the language as accurate as possible. And like I said, the ERC supported it unanimously. I wanted to still take it to exec because I wanted you all to be made aware of this before it gets taken to the county board. And of course, if there are any changes or concerns that you all have, I'd be happy to work with you in order to address them here. But the last thing I'll say, with the legislator schedules, now that the budget is done, they're about to head out. And I'd like to get this to them as soon as possible. So, with that, Mr. Chair, I'll take questions. Thank you.
Anybody have questions for Supervisor Langenhahn on the letter that's in the packet? Supervisor Robinson, please.
The only question I have is you referenced administrative rule and statutes in most cases, except for the nutrient ag runoff. And I know Fred Praying, when he was a member of the Natural Resources Board, was very critical of the state legislature and not providing the guidance and the guidance relative to the statutes. And you're not referencing 281. Was that by design? You're referencing 151 and others. So I'm just
So it was not, and I actually have to take a moment here because NR 151 is the one that I'm most familiar with. So if you just provide me a couple seconds here, I'd like to take a look at NR 281. And I have
Or
to-
Chapter 281 of the statute.
Oh, chapter 2. Okay, because NR 281, I've got paint and ink formulation. So let me, Mr. Chair, I can look at this right now. If there's more discussion, I'll circle back.
And I would just ask that between now and maybe when we vote on it, if we could just take a look and make sure we're capturing all of those areas that we're looking for change. And if 281 is the limiting factor, and again, the natural resources, head of the Natural Resources Board was frustrated with the legislature relative to those provisions.
I will just add that when I brought up those concerns regarding runoff management with staff, they had said that the appropriate administrative code, or at least the guidance I was provided, was NR 151.
But it's based typically on that underlying with the Rains Act, on that underlying state statutes of 281 and others. So we can take a look at that, but I just raise that as because you were talking about code, which is an executive agency perspective, subject to legislative review, but within the context, it's very difficult to enact a rule these days without being consistent with where the statutes are.
Well, being that I'm not, I looked at NR 151 coming in today, but would staff have any clarity to provide there for the advantages of including the language in 281 if Lori's joining us?
Laura?
Yeah, I think, can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can. Thank you.
I think, again, we went to the 151 because that is more about what guides what we can and cannot do. So I think we focused more on that when we were looking at this letter. So, but I hear what Supervisor Robinson is saying as well. So,
But I think what Supervisor Robinson is referring to is NR 151 gets its authority directly from state statute. So in order
Yes.
to actually create NR 151, they have to tie it back to the statute. So the statute would have to change, or not necessarily wouldn't have to change. NR 151 could still change as long as the agency is willing to change it, as long as the authority in chapter it allows them to change it. And that's, I think, the linkage that we're trying to ensure that is there.
so I guess I don't see a concern with referencing both.
I would have
I
a
think
follow.
our focus was more. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I do have a follow-up, though, because then is the authority for 243 also drawn from 281?
I got to double check that one for you.
Sure.
Hang on.
Because if NR 151 is tied to, too many numbers here, 281, I would think that 243 is tied to 281, but I'm not entirely certain.
Yeah, hang on. I'll get you an answer. Hang on that.
Well, I think what the concern is, we just provide that linkage in the letter before we actually finalize the vote on the
Okay.
letter by next Tuesday, so we can work on that update and create that
Well,
linkage.
sure. Yep. No, okay. Yep, I understand it now. Okay, very good.
Any other discussion or questions and concerns on the letter? Supervisor
Hey, this is
Dickinson.
Supervisor Dickinson. Thank you. I appreciate this letter. I've spoken often about the opportunity, the restricted opportunity of local control on a grand scale. I guess I would have liked to have seen these maybe individual, but I understand why they're together. And a simply individual is it allows the individual measure itself to be addressed by the full board. But I certainly support the letter in its totality. So thank you, Supervisor Langenhahn, for doing that. And I would certainly approve this. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, what is your pleasure? It is on the agenda for action. Supervisor Robinson, please.
I move that we approve and advance this to the county board.
Motion, is there a second? Second by Vice Chair McEwen. Motion and seconded to approve and forward to the county board with the additional sites to linkage. Any other discussion? Supervisor Longeman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the motion also reflecting the linkage of the code to the statute. Supervisor Robinson? Okay. Thank you.
Good. Supervisor Robinson.
On that question, just looking at 243.01, the authority for that comes from chapters 281 and 283 of the statutes. So,
Okay, any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the letter authored to the governor, Evers, and the state legislature regarding local control with the sites back to Chapter 281 and Chapter 281 and 283 respectively, signify by saying aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carried. Thank you, everyone, and we'll work to get those sites in the letter for the update. We'll move back to item number 5, and that is education presentation, committee discussion update on the administrator's work plan. Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And everyone should have received an email from me just earlier this afternoon as soon as I finished putting the update together. So it's not in your packet, but in speaking with Chair Gibbs, my hope is that you can take additional time after my comments here today and we can talk about this at your next month's meeting in connection with the ongoing budget discussions that each of you are having at your specific standing committees and also here at exec. Because I do think there are some opportunities to link some of these projects, particularly some of the plans that were put off, or I should say not prioritized in this year's work plan, to provide some funding if we're going to move those things forward, because I do think some funding is necessary to do that. But I'll try to go through this relatively quickly. That said, of course, if there's a question, please don't hesitate to reach out. And again, you'll have more time. I wanted to start with, this might look a little different. It's relatively similar to the format that we've used in the past, but I tried to incorporate some feedback I've gotten from supervisors about how it was organized, and worked with Gary Olson from North Central Healthcare and Jerry Klein from CCIT to try to get us all to use a relatively similar format. So again, there's consistency should you be looking at those other documents as well. So I'll start with facility-related projects. Relative to the Lakeview Drive campus and the North Central specific projects, again, I know the progress has been quite good. If you've been over to the campus, you'll see the C-wing is being demolished at this point, or an area for staff parking. But overall, our intent is and our plan is to have the North Central projects completed by the end of this year. And as you'll see in the rest of the work plan on this page, relative to some of the county work, that continues moving into next year. Specifically, just to talk about some of that work in item 1B and 1C, the social services move is complete. So all of our staff have been relocated to that Lakeview Drive campus. It's gone exceedingly well. If I would have had higher expectations as to the logistics, they would have been unreasonable. Staff have done a great job. CCIT did a wonderful job. And the public has really, I don't think that service has been interrupted in any meaningful way at all. So we have the ongoing, a couple of projects that relate to that move that are at least now being considered for inclusion in the administrator's proposed budget based on some guidance from HR Finance, but that will come in future meetings. I would note with respect to the facilities planning, I note on here in a couple of different locations that the lease agreement with North Central Healthcare was signed. That was signed earlier this year, so that work plan item is also completed. With respect to item D, 1D, the highway shop potential relocation, that I think is certainly an item of ongoing work is taking place. In fact, I know Commissioner Griesbach was having a meeting today, yet this morning, to to look into that some more. But, excuse me. I would just say, I think one of the areas that had historically been kind of an underlying assumption was that really moving toward facility consolidation with Parks, Rec, and Forestry and the Highway Department was the direction to move. I think in light of the presentation to the Infrastructure Committee earlier this year and the significant cost increases that would be necessary for that joint facility, as well as the fact that to this point we haven't been able to locate a piece of property that would accommodate a joint facility within an area within the city limits or adjacent to it. I think broadening our scope is sound strategy. So that's staff is starting to do that as well, and we'll certainly keep you informed. I anticipate another presentation to infrastructure in the very near future. With respect to item E, this really relates to working to vacate those River Drive properties and building on the fact that, as I indicated just immediately prior to this, that consolidation of a facility with Parks, Rec, and Forestry and Highway in a short time period is really not feasible. So we are kind of identifying what those long-term or mid-term and short-term strategies might be. I had a conversation with Deputy Administrator Holman this morning, last night and this morning, about that very topic. So we're working to develop those plans, but I'm very confident that we'll have an option that will align with the board's previous directive to really have those areas open in the end of either next year or early 2025. The West Side Master Plan, you'll see that that's deemed complete. I think really the next step is trying to work with the board to identify what are those next steps relative to that master plan. The one that we've heard from the staff perspective talked about significantly, and I believe I understand why, and that is the large cost, is really that ice arena replacement. Not only from an infrastructure perspective do we have this needs to be something we address relatively promptly because of the age of that infrastructure, but also from the cost perspective. So based on just the discussion of the board in other areas talking about facilities, about the desire to have kind of more firm numbers with respect to economic analysis and facility construction costs, I have spoken with Jamie Polly, and Director Polly is working to kind of put together a cost plan, a funding plan for an analysis of what a new facility could look like, and what the economic impact would be, and also what the cost would be. So we're going to hopefully be able to bring you something yet this year to kind of move that conversation along if you choose to do so. We're of course going to take direction from the board on what that looks like moving forward, because that certainly is a large policy question. I think the good opportunity for us, I didn't put this in the document, but the utilization of that facility, it is vitally important for a number of user groups, as well as the school district, so the Wausau School District. So finding a way to work with the school district to see what role, if any, they're willing to play in that, I think is important. Then lastly, under the facility projects is the aid in developing the policy or process relative to divestment, and not speaking about tax deed properties. Of course, this is county-owned facilities and properties. I would say this movement has been less substantial, really probably primarily due to just the other topics that are being dealt with at HR Finance and Property. I mean, as we'll talk about shortly with respect to the budget, there's been a lot of discussion about updating our budget process, and adopting that process thus far has been, because it's a new process, has taken a considerable amount of time. So I noted that as a minimal to moderate process. I will say on the staff side, I've done a fair amount of outreach to a couple of organizations that I think is worthy of note, and I didn't put this in the work plan. Reached out to UW Extension, working with Jeremy Solon, the new area director, and UW Extension does have economic development staff that can assist us in some of the discussion and policy setting. I have some details about that. They really try to focus those efforts because they are volunteer driven through economic development professionals around the state to areas that do not already have economic development plans in place. Now, of course, our River Drive properties do have an economic development plan in place. The county participated in, the city led a planning process for what's referred to the South Riverfront area, which includes the River Drive properties. However, the Thomas Street property is not included in that. So certainly UW Extension may be a valid resource for us to reach out to move that forward. Similarly, after speaking with Chair Gibbs, I submitted an application for an economic recovery corps program where they provide a fellow, I believe it's for 2 years, to assist municipalities which includes counties, in developing and implementing economic development plans. And there's no cost to the county. Now, I haven't heard back on whether or not we will receive that. I just submitted the application just a couple of weeks ago. As noted in here, the deadline was on June 30th. So as soon as I get that update, I'll let you know. But I'm going to walk around with my fingers and toes crossed for a while, hoping that we get that, because I think that would be a great opportunity for the county, of course, at no cost. Moving on then to the budget-related items, item 2. 2A, the significant focus that the board has placed on really improving that experience for the county board in developing the budget. So I won't belabor that. You've all been part of that conversation. I think we made significant progress. From my perspective, I thought the kickoff meetings went reasonably well. The development of those mandatory discretionary documents, the levy 5-year comparisons, and the rate fee documents, I think was time well spent, and I'll talk about the rate fee document in particular a little bit later. And then, of course, you adopted the budget priorities in June, which, while a little bit later than in our overall budget timeline, still is providing administration sufficient time to incorporate those items. And then later today, in fact, you will consider, or at least discuss, the budget assumptions that were acted upon by HR Finance yesterday. Already spoke about the mandatory discretionary programs. That presentation or document was completed and given to each supervisor has that, as well as the presentation to all of the standing committees. I note this later, and I'll talk about it now and then just not refer to it in detail later, but I think there's an opportunity with respect to that, the fee document. You have a couple of areas within the work plan that really relate to each other, and the utilization of that fee document, incorporation of that into the annual budget process, I think is a real positive step, and my intent was to do that next year. I think we can do that this year, and I think getting some direction from whether it's the individual standing committees, the HR Finance Committee, perhaps executive or the full board, I don't know what the right answer is. That's for, of course, all of you to determine, but getting some direction on what amount of increase, if any, you want to have for all of those fees. You'll see that in the budget assumption discussion today. I think there's a real opportunity, and it makes it, it lends itself well to kind of a comprehensive approach where the board has the opportunity to see those fees each and every year. As I noted before, the North Central Healthcare debt repayment and lease documents, those were called for through the adoption of the budget to be completed. The lease was signed in March. The revised debt schedule was also incorporated into that lease, and the terms of the revised debt schedule were included in that county board presentation relative to the budget orientation kickoff. The Regional Forensic Science Center work, of course, the task force is chaired by Task Force Chairperson McEwen, and a lot of work has been done there. I won't belabor the point. We've given a number of recent updates to various committees and the full board on that. But suffice to say, we have a fair amount of fundraising, strategizing to do, and we do have kind of the centerpiece of that plan. The next key piece of that plan, I should say, is a local stakeholder engagement meeting scheduled for the end of August or early September, which we're working on developing all the materials for that. Right now, the projected gap for financing, depending on whether or not the federal government comes through with the request we put in, is either between $3.8 and $5.8 million. So we're making good progress, and I fully expect that number to come down just based on our work to maximize our available county match. In terms of finance-related projects, the implementation of our ERP, our new ERP system, Workday, Certainly ongoing, a lot of work has been done and continues to be done. For your, I guess your edification here, it's not entirely helpful, but we have, in our terms, moved into phase 2 of the project, and we're about 30% complete according to how CCIT is breaking that down. So what that means is we're really looking into our budget building module and how to enhance our reports that we're working to get out of the system. The other part of our workday journey, I would say, is integrating our HR system into our financial system. And I know I've spoken about this before. We have not had a centralized HR system. Our system is very decentralized and paper focused, individual Excel spreadsheet focused. So that is a significant undertaking as well. Moving on then to the American Rescue Plan Act. This has been, of course, a pandemic response driven process, and the HR Finance and Property Committee is, and I note this in the historical side of the graph or the table, really focused initially on getting some public feedback, developing a process for projects to be submitted. However, we have not moved forward with many of those publicly submitted processes, and the direction from the board recently through your budget priorities was very clear to prioritize the utilization of those American Rescue Plan Act dollars for capital projects to limit the long-term capital expense for the county through other things such as borrowing. So we're working with HR Finance and Property to review that capital improvement program list that I talked about before. In terms of a reconciliation, I would say approximately the county has about $15.3 million of American Rescue Plan Act funds that are that have either been never allocated or have been allocated but not encumbered and can be reallocated either because the project came in under budget or because we moved away from utilizing American Rescue Plan Act funds as the source of those funds. The easiest example of that is the Highway Department. We had initially allocated approximately $10 million for some highway projects and eventually then, for various reasons, moved away from identifying that as a funding source. Moving on to the opioid settlement fund deployment planning effort. This was actually something that was added to the work plan. You had adopted the work plan at the end of last year, beginning into this year. But very early in the year, there was an addition. The board amended the work plan to add staff support for the development of a plan relative to utilizing those funds. That's been going very well. We provided an update to the Public Safety Committee earlier this week. The Criminal Justice Coordinating Council has been the venue that we've used for those discussions. I worked with the Health Department to put together a charter with a timeline of what we were hoping to accomplish to get the plan in front of the plan that would be developed, of course, get that plan then in front of the Public Safety Committee for review yet this year. So we developed that charter, have been holding monthly meetings with the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council to do a number of things. We started with developing an end statement. That group developed an end statement around Marathon County residents being free from the physical, emotional, social, and economic impacts of opioid misuse. We then followed the results-based accountability framework to identify indicators to help us ascertain whether or not we were having an impact on that end statement, moving in the right direction. How would we know if we were successful? The two indicators that the group selected were one indicator through the medical examiner's office, which was drug overdose deaths due to opioids. And the second is a measure that is maintained, as I understand it, by DHS, but it's from local ambulance runs, and those are non-fatal overdoses. So between those two indicators, the group determined those were most indicative of whether or not we were having the desired impact. The next step that we've been working on has been trying to identify strategies that we should fund to impact those indicators. So again, we're hoping to have that completed yet this year, to have a report to public safety. It's been, we're a little bit behind schedule. I'd say we're one meeting behind what I had laid out in the charter for a timeline, but again, it's been, the feedback that we've gotten from participants, has been, it's been going reasonably well. Next item, financial related item, is the development of a Parks, Rec, and Forestry Sustainability Plan. This has been a kind of a long-standing item of importance to me, primarily, to look at our opportunities. It aligns with rates and fees, but really about being sustainable, particularly with our capital infrastructure. So the Parks, Rec, and Forestry Department provided a presentation to the Environmental Resources Committee earlier this year. I believe it was just at the end of May 30th, laying out kind of an analysis of how their levy, where the levy funds go with respect to the programs at Park, Rec, and Forestry, how their other revenue sources exist, and also highlighting some opportunities and a plan that, from the staff perspective within the department, they think they can examine over the next several years to enhance our ability to maintain capital infrastructure and ensure that the department is adequately funded. So the next steps for me, I have to review that document. I'll speak with Jamie to assess what, from my perspective, are the priority areas, and of course, I'll engage the board on what those next steps are. From my perspective, I think looking at Washington County as a blueprint has been helpful. I also look to the state of Wisconsin. But I understand that you, as the policymakers, this is ultimately your decision. We know what programs and services we're going to deliver based on the direction you've given us to this point, but it's at what cost, I think, is the part that we have some opportunity. The state of Wisconsin, as you know, if you go to a state park, you have a state park sticker. Washington County adopted a similar program. I think given the amenities that we have, I think that's something I would ask that the elected officials, you, this board, examine whether or not you'd support moving in that direction. Right now, we have opportunities for certain activities that perhaps put a greater strain on our resources within our parks, that perhaps asking individuals to pay for that is something you're open to. If not, knowing that is still very vitally important for me from a budget planning perspective. So that's kind of the next steps as I see them. Next on the list for finance-related projects, the Solid Waste Department landfill gas rights acquisition. As you know, we wrapped that up just right about the end of January of this year. That was a significant undertaking. A lot of work went into that. Give kudos to Corporation Counsel and the Solid Waste Department for working through that in December and January. To giving you all an update, we have been receiving our payments required under that new landfill gas purchase agreement and accompanying lease of $25,000 a month. My plan for the budget building for next year is to call for solid waste to make a contribution to the general fund operations of the county in the amount of $200,000, and that amount really, in my mind, is correlated rather well with some of the overhead expenses that the county has otherwise performed. So if you think about, we have a lot of computer systems that we maintain, and certainly there are the hardware pieces that individual departments, we all pay for our laptops that we have within our departments, but there's a lot of back end that goes into that as well. There's our new Workday tool, for example, has not historically, our Kayenta system wasn't charged out to departments. So really looking to operate in such a way where we're capturing the true value of those overhead services, which again will have a positive impact on the county's overall budget. As we receive more revenue through that agreement, that's of course the hope. Right now, the $25,000 a month is really based on a fee that envisions the partner, the third party, getting the operation up and running. They're not generating renewable natural gas at this point. The $25,000 is really a payment on their part based on the partnership in the existing lease. So as that grows, I think we have a greater possibility for revenue for general county operations as well, certainly as for the landfill. Item F, assisting the Human Resource, Finance, and Property Committee in developing and implementing a solution to tax deed and property description backlogs. I'll flip the order of that in my update. Property description, as you likely know from past updates, that was an area where we have just historically had a bit of a lag between land transactions and the descriptions being updated. It was an area that, in speaking with the treasurer, I wanted to make sure that we really addressed, because I had been hearing from municipalities about the impact of that. So over the last 2 years, or really a year and a half, we made that a priority, transferred 2 positions from the treasurer's office to conservation planning and zoning to better align with existing bench strength within that department. And I'm happy to report that that has gone exceedingly well. We are essentially, at least in this area, I'll call it up to date. It's not truly up to date in that a land transaction done today is entered in the system, but we're up to date from kind of the perspective or the measure in that area. With respect to the standard transactions, complex ones take some additional work, but that's a significant change. We had a backlog of over 2,500 parcels. So I'm very proud of the work that staff have done there. I also say that we transferred the assessment rollover process to conservation planning and zoning from the treasurer's office. The treasurer's office had some additional work relative to the Workday project, particularly the teller implementation. So from a capacity standpoint, it also made sense to find some outside assistance. We found a limited term employee with significant experience in that area. And again, I'm very happy to report last week, in fact, I got a call from a local assessor who said this was the best year was seamless. However you're doing it, he said to keep doing that. So I spoke with Lori this morning and passed those kind words along, but very proud of the process improvements we put in place at Conservation Planning and Zoning and Register of Deeds to address the property description backlog. Moving then to tax deed, I noted that as ongoing as opposed to complete. And the reason for that is we've still got a way to go. We've had a significant tax deed backlog, which has an impact not only on the county from a financial standpoint, but I think also, it's important not to lose sight of the fact that it also has an impact on the housing shortage in the county. It's not going to be an immense impact, but there are certainly a number of those properties that, should they be repurposed, could serve as available housing stock. And in fact, yesterday, the HR Finance and Property Committee just accepted a bid for a tax foreclosure, which was well over $100,000 actually. So you get both those pieces there, the financial and then the redevelopment housing aspect. So the county board had adopted the ordinance to add in-rem as a tool in the toolbox for us to use. You did that in April of this year. We have our first publication is scheduled for this month. And just for, again, a little bit of background, we need to do 3 publications in the paper of all of those properties that we're going to proceed through the in-rem process before we can actually proceed with those court filings. So we're anticipated to be in court in November of 2023 with that first wave of in-rem. That said, we still hope to have a second wave started in Q4 of 2023. The other positive I'll say is I spoke with the treasurer's office this morning. One positive of sending out the letters, and now we're sending out letters CCing banks, and we're publishing in the paper where banks see that the individual that has a mortgage through their bank is tax delinquent. The bank has a little extra push that they can provide to those people to pay, and we have seen an increase in the number of people getting current on their taxes. So those are all positives. In terms of work still to do, the HR Finance and Property Committee had considered making other amendments to our ordinance, our tax foreclosure ordinance, but in light of the recent Supreme Court case, the U.S. Supreme Court case, we're taking a little bit of a pause on that to receive some education from Wisconsin Counties Association to make sure we're doing that appropriately. Human resource related projects, I already talked about Workday. I just noted, you can see the notes above. Our health insurance or health care delivery methodology. We did adopt the same practice we've had over recent years to go out for a request for proposals for both fully insured and self-funded options. The proposal period is closed. In fact, we're getting a presentation from our consultant, USI. The date of that, it's going to be the week of July 24th, and as soon as we have that information on their findings and their recommendations, we'll bring that to the HR Finance and Property Committee. Next item on the list, aid in the development of additional policies to retain and attract or recruit. HR Finance and Property has received a number of presentations from staff kind of on not only our current state, what is the state of our turnover, our retention, our recruiting efforts, and I guess I can tell you they're certainly improved from where they were last year. The class compensation study and implementation was extremely important for us in that regard. But the HR Finance and Property Committee is moving beyond simply compensation, looking at benefits. From my perspective, I note here the discussion is coalesced around two concepts. One, looking at our hours of public access to enhance public service as well as provide some employee benefit. Simply put, if we can look at and evaluate being open, expand our hours Monday through Thursday and reduce the hours on Friday, that's a positive from the public standpoint because people can, if we can offer some hours of access beyond what are your typical work hours, that's been well received. Kim's been doing kind of an informal pilot in that regard. But then also from the employee perspective, there's a significant benefit. It gives that half day. It's not people not having to use it for PTO if we can, if they have their hours in. They're still working 40 hours a week, but it based on our hours of public access, they're able to kind of redeploy their own personal time. And the second is around the idea of childcare benefits from the employer standpoint. I'll talk more about childcare later in the work of the Extension, Education, Economic Development Committee. But right now, HR Finance and Property has asked staff to develop a list of kind of what approaches are available in the marketplace. I've about 90%, 95% done with that, and I'll bring that back at a future meeting for HR Finance and Property. Moving then to intergovernmental work, and this is really meant to capture kind of what are some additional duties that the board has tasked me with by virtue of your intergovernmental agreements. North Central Healthcare serving on the executive committee. I note here a couple of areas that I think are important. I'll say from the relationship standpoint, my assessment is the relationship of each of the counties, most certainly Marathon, the relationship and functioning of that North Central Healthcare leadership team and the relationship we have with it, I think is improved. I'd say it's actually probably the best that, not probably, it is the best that it's been since I've been employed in administration. There's been strides to improve the relationship with the various social services organizations within each of the counties, and why that's particularly important for Marathon County. Working with getting that relationship to be enhanced, North Central made some changes to the manner in which it is going to do its billing for CCS and specifically its reconciliation. It should lead to approximately $200,000 of increased revenues for Marathon County Social Services. And before everyone gets excited about what to do with that money, I think it's important we set that aside, at least for purposes of budgeting, to provide some cushion to service that existing debt. But nevertheless, that I think is a great example of the improved relationships and kind of understanding that through North Central's actions, they can have a significant impact, a significant positive impact on the county operations, including county finances. The other thing I note here and why I provided I characterized the progress as mixed or minimal to moderate is that there have been some real challenges at North Central similar to what we're facing in our jail. And if you've looked at recent publications from the Wisconsin Policy Forum, you'll see that for the state of Wisconsin, behavioral health, nursing homes, and prisons are the areas where they're having the hardest time hiring. Well, prisons are similar to our jail, and it's no surprise that our jail, we're having some significant issues with respect to retention and attraction. But the other two, behavioral health and nursing homes, North Central operates both of those, and they operate them on a 24/7 capacity. So they've had some significant issues with retaining staff and staffing costs, very similar to what we're having in our jail. So that's why I characterize it as mixed. I think work is ongoing. I note further on the next page, but in the same row, I think there's a real opportunity for this board to become very active with respect to the state of Wisconsin, similar to the letter you just evaluated from the Environmental Resources Committee about local control. The need for the state of Wisconsin to re-examine its decision with respect to the supplemental nursing home payments. If those nursing home payments don't come back, I will be very blunt. I don't see North Central being in a position to service that debt. That's over $1 million for North Central Healthcare with respect to Mountain View Care Center. The other piece that makes that unlikely is the prospective sale of Pinecrest. That was that's Lincoln County's nursing home. That was a very significant operation in Lincoln County that allowed overhead expenses to essentially be spread across that entity as well. So with that potentially being sold, it looks like it's going to be sold, those overhead expenses have to be reabsorbed by the rest of North Central. So I think that opportunity to get engaged with the state legislature to make sure that they understand, and the governor's office understand the value of those supplemental payments, particularly for county nursing homes, because of our mandated service requirements for certain populations, that we really do need. I think it behooves us. We don't need to, but it would make sense from a financial perspective to be active there. With respect to CCIT, based on the intergovernmental agreement, I serve on the CCIT board. Been serving as the chair since April of 2021. You can see I've noted some historical work in there, but really the focus this year has been trying to limit the number of new requests. I mean, IT seems to be the answer for everything. If you ask an operational department, it's a piece of new software, upgrading current software, the opportunity for expenses are significant. And we have a lot of ongoing work already between Workday and some of the ancillary programs that support Workday. The facility moves we have, those require significant IT assistance, whether it's just in the design or whether it's in the setup of those or the moving of staff. So that's been a challenge, but it's been as chair, and I know Chair Gibbs serves on that commission as well, that's been a focus of mine to try to get people to pare back their requests of IT, at least in the short term. And also the other thing I'll note is cyber insurance and cyber preparedness. Attacks it seems like every week you read about one and the significant impact it's having on whether it's a private business or certainly a public entity, a government. So we need to make sure that we're prepared on both ends. One, that you mitigate risk, and two, that you're prepared to restore in the event of such an attack. The Marathon County Public Library, here I noted that my progress here has been minimal or no progress, and that's entirely on my lack of capacity at this point. The library director has submitted to me revised MOUs for me to review for the agreements we have with respect to facility, legal, HR, and financial services. I just haven't had time to review those. I hope to do so yet this year, but I wanted to be very transparent with you. That's just been one of those projects that hasn't risen to the top. The CJCC, Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, I serve on the executive committee by virtue of the ordinance that you passed. I serve on the CJCC itself, but then was appointed to that executive committee, which is also in the bylaws. Work closely with the chair, Judge O'Neill, and the vice chair, Chair Gibbs, to develop a work plan. I won't belabor the work plan. I put a link in the document so you can see it. The CJCC is evaluating a white paper on how to impact the attorney shortage locally. just made a presentation to Public Safety earlier this week on Tuesday. I think there are some opportunities there. It should be finalized in Q3 of this year. The data officer recruitment, you might be asking, well, why isn't Mr. Pierner here today? I'm happy to report that he's sitting in an interview for the data officer, a second interview at this point, along with the sheriff and some others. That recruitment has gone well. We had a number of qualified applicants. We did first interviews last week, and at the beginning of this week, we had second interviews today. I hope to be able to bring whoever is identified as the best candidate on relatively shortly. The other big thing noted there is our Justice Alternative Programming contract. I would say we're about probably 15 days behind schedule, but in light of the significant program that we're talking about, it's about a $1.4 million. We're virtually on track. We might approach it differently than we have in the past. We had 2 submittals. I think it's reasonably, it's possible that we'll split that contract, which has historically been a single contract across a great number of programs, but time will tell on that. I have to do reference checks yet this week and on Monday. And then we have some programming for juvenile justice back to school, kind of a refresher on our work plan. The next item, item E, 5E, is a countywide dashboard. It's tied directly to that data officer work. We structured the recruitment around experience with development of dashboards and the utilization of technology to gather insight from data. So that the progress I noted as it's moving forward. That said, I don't have a data officer at this point, but I do think we made some progress. Departments have been looking at what those key performance indicators might be. Next item on the list is support from Extension Education, support for the Extension Education Economic Development Committee around childcare. We allocated the funds. The board approved the recommendation from the Dream Up cohort on how to do that. Extension Education Economic Development has asked staff to compile some of the various areas the committee's discussed about potential ways to get involved. They've had a number of meetings, recently had a pretty robust conversation with stakeholders, and we're working to develop that roadmap according to your adopted strategic plan. Ultimately, of course, that committee will bring forward a recommendation. And then the rest of the items on this list are the items that in the work plan discussion you listed under not prioritized for 2023, and I just wanted to make sure you had access to them. Some of them have kind of risen to the top, and we're making progress on them based on continued committee discussion or board discussion. The first is the county event policy. That has been a continued discussion at infrastructure. And based on that, we put together the idea of moving forward with a work group. And in fact, that the work group, which was, I saw it, volunteers essentially from the various standing committees of primary impact, environmental resources, infrastructure, and public safety. 2 volunteers from each, and we do have a series of volunteers to participate in that work group. We have a meeting scheduled for the 24th of this month. Staff from CPZ are going to lead that effort. We've had some staff meetings already to develop the draft charter, to lay out some timelines and some goals. But that work group, again, is scheduled to start later this month. There was discussion in the budget process last year at HR Finance. There was a discussion about hiring a forensic auditor. So within the work plan prioritization process, I had provided for the board's consideration an approach that's being used by another county, and that is to utilize a contract forensic auditor to identify a number of departments each year for what moves being, it's really a supplement to what you'll see through your general financial audit, which is really aimed at your finance reporting, whether or not you're following generally accepted accounting principles. This, in my mind, there'd be an opportunity to look at our business processes. Do we have opportunities to be more fiscally responsible from a business process? So I put that on there. I certainly can develop the cost. I have colleagues, I know of one colleague that has been utilizing that approach for a number of years. The next item on the list, it relates to evaluating our vehicle leasing program, to expand it to include the health department and social services that had historically been on past work plans, but was not moved forward. We've used enterprise leasing program through conservation planning and zoning and facilities and capital management for a number of years. And we made a presentation earlier this week to public safety about expanding that to the sheriff's office fleet. Now, for context, and I'm sure I'm going to get the number of vehicles wrong, but between facilities and capital management and conservation planning and zoning, I believe they have 10 vehicles. The sheriff's office alone has well over 80 vehicles. So it's a significant move in terms of scale, but the sheriff's office is very excited to move in that direction. It's not anything we need to take to the board. It's truly operational, but it's a significant change. So we made the presentation to public safety, letting them know that we're moving in that direction. The positive with respect to social services in the health department, and why I'm still going to work on this from an operational standpoint, is it's consistent with some of the discussion at HR Finance about having a more appropriate and forward-looking capital replacement strategy. So when I talked before about Park, Rec, and Forestry, for example, if we were to find the necessary funding for the upfront cost to build an ice arena, that's great, but you should not only budget to run the ice arena on the operational side, you should fund depreciation so that when you need a new ice arena, you don't need to find $20 million. You have a place from which to do that, or you don't need to borrow for $20 million, and that's particularly true for revenue generating operations. The same is true here. Right now, we have a lot of staff in those departments that utilize their personal vehicles for work purposes, and of course, when they do that, they're entitled to the IRS reimbursement rate. That said, I think there's an opportunity, if we develop an internal fleet, we would redeploy that IRS reimbursement rate to funding fleet operations. And why that's important is because for a number of those programs within those departments, they are fully funded or significantly funded through other governmental charges. And your fleet operation charge is generally less than 66 cents a mile when you look at just the vehicle operations. If we load in the staff time and other things, of course you get closer to that, but you can start to essentially fund replacement for vehicles, which I think is an opportunity. Next is something that, of course, you're all familiar with, the idea of looking at emergency medical services through a countywide system. This is an area where, when I started my comments, I said if you want to move forward with some studies, it might be helpful to give me some feedback to put some costs together to include those in the 2024 budget. This is one of those areas. If we wanted to secure a consultant to do an evaluation of what that might look like. Certainly a long-standing issue, I won't belabor the point. Next is engaging the library to identify an appropriate use for the third floor and corresponding capital improvement plan. My suggestion is that the county board, and perhaps it's through the Extension Education Economic Development Committee, really provide some direction to the library board, and particularly the representatives on the library board, as to what are your deliverables, your expectations with respect to what would success look like in terms of utilization of that space, and I noted financial and operational there. I already referenced the opioid settlement funds and how that was prioritized and moved into the work plan. Secure a telecommunications audit. That's been a thing historically. About a number of years ago in 2016 was the last time we did that. incorporating a comprehensive fee schedule in the annual budget. I already talked about that. I think we're going to be able to do that this year. Item I is, I think, a significant area that you should give some thought to whether or not we move forward with it yet in some form this year, or certainly come up with some plans for the 2024 budget. The relationship with the UW Stevens Point Wausau campus and the county, I think, is ripe for some discussion. I know all of you are familiar with the news. You've seen the Board of Regents made a decision to close the Richland Center campus based on declining enrollments. Our enrollment declines, of course, have not been that significant, but they are significant. Our campus, as was all of the other campuses in the state, they're built at an age where they're coming to the point, and HR Finance saw this yesterday with one of the capital improvement requests. They are in need of some very significant not only planning, but actual infrastructure updates. So giving some thought to how do you want to engage the UW in that discussion? What does that future look like? Of course, Chair Gibbs and I actually just met with the chancellor of the Stevens Point campus as well as leadership locally to talk about what their plans are, to get some information from them. But you saw through the state budget process, Washington County, before the state budget process really got fully underway, made a recommendation to combine their tech college and their local UW, and they secured secured funding through the Joint Finance Committee, several $1 million to kind of move in that direction. That was vetoed then through the governor's budget, with the direction to come up with a comprehensive approach for all the universities as opposed to just an answer for one. But nevertheless, this is a significant area of importance for Marathon County. My thought, and I made this reference in my draft work plan for your consideration earlier this year, perhaps a task force would be a good mechanism from the county board to get some local leadership as well. Because really from a staff perspective, I'm not the policymaker. I'm the person you turn to once you decide what you want done. But I can certainly provide you information to help you make that decision. Item J, comprehensive review and update of our ordinances. Again, I lay out some options. This wasn't prioritized. We've been doing it kind of in a piecemeal fashion. We updated the emergency management ordinance earlier this year. You had zoning changes updated. I anticipate that section 12 will be updated. That's that large assembly ordinance. But we've been doing it kind of on a intermediate basis as things come up. If you do that comprehensive approach, I think you might get a better product. The two ways that I would see that being possible is, again, really whether you call it a task force or a work group, being one, and the second being a vendor. And I know Kim did some work last year to go out and kind of see what that cost might look like. I would actually prefer rather than a vendor, if we were going to do that, I would prefer to go the LTE route, hire perhaps a local lawyer to assist us in that, because they'll know our county better than perhaps a vendor would through a large national vendor. Item K, updating the comprehensive plan and generation of a new 5-year strategic plan. This is an area where if you do want to fund those updates, you certainly can do so. I put a link into the comprehensive plan that talks about what you had originally envisioned as your periodic updates to the comprehensive plan. There was a desire to do kind of a mini refresh of the comprehensive plan, but you do have my recollection within that document, and I didn't read it before today, but I think it's envisioned a 10-year true update, which 10 years from your strategic plan, 10 years from your comprehensive plan. Your comprehensive plan was built in 2015, adopted in 2016, and of course you just took action with respect to updating your strategic plan. Item L is essentially conducting an RFP similar to that I talked about for health insurance with respect to general liability insurance. We've been with WIMIC for a great many years. Within the state of Wisconsin, there are predominantly two providers. I think every county in Wisconsin is with those two other than one. And those are WIMIC and County Mutual. We could look into, and I know it's been a point of discussion intermittently of whether we should do that, so I put that on there for your consideration. And then lastly, this was brought up by a supervisor, reached out to me about evaluating zoning options regarding marijuana cultivation in the event that the state of Wisconsin takes steps to legalize that, to ensure that Marathon County is prepared. It's not on the work plan, of course, but I added it to the list of things to be considered. I know that was a lot. I put everyone to sleep, but happy to answer any questions.
With that, any questions from the committee? Vice Chair McEwen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the potential of Pinecrest being sold, how's that going to affect our agreement with Lincoln County?
The agreement,
North Central.
it doesn't impact our tri-county agreement at all. So the tri-county agreement provides the framework for the delivery of
Services.
core services, mental health, behavioral health services, addiction services, the services that counties are mandated to provide. The service agreement with Lincoln County, between Lincoln County and North Central Healthcare relative to the nursing home, is a nursing home management agreement. So it's outside of that. That said, it is going to have a significant impact on the financials due to the overhead allocation that I talked about before.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
I just want to add some clarification relative to the use of the ARPA dollars for capital projects. I don't think that we have specifically said, at least at the committee level, that all of those funds will go into capital projects, but rather that we would use ARPA instead of drawing down reserves. So I want to make sure that we all have that same understanding. There are some additional needs at North Central Healthcare that we may be looking at, both in terms of services and or other pandemic-related extenuating circumstances that we'll need to deal with going forward. So I want to be careful that we don't have this assumption that all ARPA dollars will go in there and we continue to have ongoing issues relative to broadband.
Supervisor Longenon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to bring up a couple of things. The first one is in regard to Pinecrest. This isn't a request to the administrator per se, but I would think that the Committee of Jurisdiction would be Health and Human Services to take up a matter related to North Central Healthcare, correct?
Yeah, it
And then
would
I'll
be.
follow up.
They are the committee of jurisdiction.
I would request that somebody communicate to them that they need to consider having some sort of initial correspondence with the state of Wisconsin regarding those supplemental dollars immediately. So that's the first thing. The second thing has to do with the countywide EMS study, assessment, whatever you want to call it. In the 2023 budget, the part of the local government funding package had $300 million related to this innovation grant. And basically how it works is at a very high level, and the rules haven't been put out by the Department of Jurisdiction yet. But if you do some consolidation, if you do transfer services, you would get a grant that's based on the savings essentially from those groups that are involved in that consolidation. What's interesting is that there's $3 million that's set aside. I think that's in addition to the $300 million that is specifically set aside for consulting. I think that would be a very wise look or an examination for the county to undertake. But the rules haven't been formulated yet. I just know that it exists as part of the budget, and there were some extensive discussions that occurred in the last couple of years regarding this topic. And the idea was proposed, but we haven't done any sort of evaluation yet. So I think that's something, again, not necessarily for the administrator. I am going to call our emergency management director, Phil Rentmeister, tomorrow and have a discussion with him about it, just see if he's aware of it, and so that we can get that on everybody's radar. And the last thing, and I guess I don't know what the ask is today, if this is a general update or whatever, but I'm going to be honest with you all. On page 11, item M, as chair of the zoning committee, there's no way in Sam hell that we're going to be taking that up anytime soon. So is this just a general update today, or do we have to approve this plan?
Just a general update.
Okay.
All I intended it for was to give you an update as to the progress that we've made. And the only reason I included it because I had a member of the board reached out and just asked to have us evaluate that. And my response was, I will put it on the future projects for consideration by the board on the work plan, not to insinuate that it was moving forward.
Well, I guess I would just end my comments by saying that I feel it's appropriate that I at least give my direction to the administrator to spend less than 0 minutes on that item. Thank you.
I will make note that NCHC, there has been requests for updates, and in discussions with the executive director from NCHC, we will be providing an update and a general update to the full board because, again, there's been a request by supervisor, but there's going to be an update to the full board in the August meeting from NCHC as far as the progress and stuff. So that will be an update to the full board. But I totally understand the supplemental payments is a separate issue, and I agree with you that Health and Human Services Committee should be the one that leads the charge on that. Other questions? Okay. Thank you, Administrator. Seeing that you don't have a lot to do, I would just hope that you could get a little more done in a day.
I'll just say staff have been, I'd be remiss if I didn't say anything, and so thank you for the opportunity to interrupt you. Staff have been doing a great job. There's a lot of stuff, as you can see on the work plan, but really very proud of the team we have. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
And that was being facetious. I do recognize the fact that the administrator is endless in his work and dedication to the county. It is when you have discussions with other administrators in other counties, when they have a work plan and their work plan has 3 or 4 or 5 at a large work plan has 5 items. Well, you look at our work plan and we have the number of stuff that we have on the work plan and the progress that we've made is significant. And that's only a reflection of the leadership that we have through Administrator Leonard and the staff that, in recent years, he's surrounded himself with department heads that are absolutely rock stars in the delivery of services to the county. So with that, we will move on. I got to get back to my agenda, I'm sorry. And we're down to item 7A, policy issue and discussion and possible action, topics for Rules Review Committee to address. I put this on the agenda because, again, I've had several supervisors contact me with requests on certain things, and I wanted to recognize that those items are not being overlooked, but are going to be referred directly to Rules Review for their discussion. In particular, one of those requests come from a Supervisor Marash, requesting potential looking at recordings for not just the standing committees that we currently do, but recordings of even some of the subcommittees, whether that be NCHC, whether it be CCIT, but there's costs that come with that, and there's also logistical challenges potentially. So Rules Review, I'm referring that to Rules Review, and thank Supervisor Marash for bringing that up, and look forward to having a recommendation from Rules Review. Also, there's been another request that I'm going to forward to Rules Review, and that's a request that we look at the reimbursement policy that we have currently in our rules. The current reimbursement is really, we moved to the new system in this term. that those requests come in, and by the 15th of the month following the quarter, those are reviewed by myself, then forwarded to, in this case, to the Finance Department. They then review them. They then input them. Because of the change that we've gone through in Workday, there's potential opportunities for some change there. And so I think that's something that's right for Rules Review to review and possibly look at the access, because it also coincides with where we used to have access to our paycheck stubs. Paycheck stubs were being, accessed. People could look at those through the shared drive. Now, the only way that they can get access to that is through Workday, and so right now the clerk is in some cases potentially looking at we're trying to look at a workaround right now until we have some kind of formal discussion about it, and that is potentially the clerk providing paper copies of paycheck stubs for the supervisors that request them, because it's really awkward right now to try to get access to Workday. That's not been granted yet, or it's not been fully implemented as far as Workday access for each of the supervisors. But that's also on the things plans to be done. So those are the two things that I had, and so I open it up for other discussion items from Exec Committee to move forward to the Rules Review Committee. Supervisor Robinson.
I think in light of the changes, but it's not. In light of the changes to the budget process, I think we need to look at making sure we're incorporating those into the rules, specifically the roles of the other standing committees, and providing input on priorities and fees and other things. So I think that's a critical need.
Okay. Other Vice Chair McEwen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was contacted by a supervisor about, and I know I talked to the chair about this, possibly changing our full county board meetings to 6 p.m. instead of 7, and it was decided that trying to do that term wouldn't work, because people already scheduled their appointments around the 7 o'clock. But I plan on discussing that at Rules Review, is changing that to the 6 p.m. And also a request about going to one full county board meeting instead of the 2, and we did talk about this last go-around with rules, but that's going to be on for discussion also.
And I thank you. I forgot to mention that, or forgot that I did refer that one request at one time to the 6 o'clock meeting, also to you from a supervisor. Other discussion. Supervisor Seavelt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like the committee to look at the WebEx, the virtual part of attending meetings. As a standing chair committee, I have a hard time having people even come to the meetings. They're all on virtual, and you don't get a good conversation. Not saying that we have to eliminate it completely, but limit it. Does maybe 2-3 virtuals a year? Just take a good hard look at it, because we are losing participation in those standing committee meetings, at least mine. So I would have to take a good hard look at it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Robinson, you had additional?
I think we have to look at the sunsetting task forces, and whether or not there's a need beyond that in terms of the broadband task force. And I don't know if the morgue task force is sunset, but just look at at those that are time sensitive and make sure that we have addressed the needs and there's no ongoing need. And if there isn't a need, then we have to make sure that those functions are absorbed within the standing committees.
Okay, other items to be taken up by recommendations for rules review. Supervisor Langenham, please.
Everybody else in person here said something, so I guess I'll say something. I think just to do our regular review of the program committees and their relationships with the standing committees, just to not lose sight of that. Thank you.
Okay. Any other recommendations for rules review? I know one of the things in the rules that we have is obviously a polling of the full board for their discussion and items for rules review to take up, and I know the chair plans on doing that, so there will be opportunity for the full board to provide input, but I thought it was imperative that we, as the leadership of the board, provide the things that we're seeing from our perspective and provide that input. Other discussion? Any other discussion? Okay. Our next meeting is scheduled for August 17th at 3 o'clock. And any supervisors having items wish to be on the agenda, please let me know. If not, we are down to item number 9. What is your pleasure? Motion by Vice Chair McEwen and a second by Supervisor Langenhahn to adjourn. All in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say no. We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.